This is Sid Roth saying, I have a vision. Now is the set time to blow the trumpet in Zion.
Blow a trumpet in Zion, sounding on the mountain. Blow a trumpet in Zion, for the day of the Lord is come.
Shalom, Mishpucha. Shalom, family. Mishpucha is a Hebrew word. It means family, and we're the Mishpucha, the family with a Jewish heart, made up of Jewish and non-Jewish people that are one new man in the Messiah, getting ready, Mishpucha, to blow the grandest shofar, or the grandest trumpet in Zion. We want everyone, everywhere, to hear the good news. We want everyone, everywhere, to be red hot for the Messiah. My guest, by way of telephone at his home in Millerstown, Pennsylvania, is John McTernan. John is co-founder of International Cops for Christ. He spent 26 years as a federal agent with Internal Security Division of the IRS. He's written a book called God's Final Warning to America, in which, and I've never seen this so documented before, so many events where there is sin such as homosexuality or abortion or anti-Israel sentiment. Directly, the same day, judgment falls. Well, the judgment could be a hurricane. The judgment could be a stock market crash. Speaking of stock market crashes, John, on March 10th, year 2000, the NASDAQ hit its all-time high. But something amazing happened. Explain that.
Sid, you're absolutely right. On March 10th, 2000, the NASDAQ reached 5,048, which was its all-time high. On that very day, the Premier of Israel, Barak, came out and said that Israel plans to offer the Palestinians a state in Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and that also Jerusalem was going to be open to discussion, because up to that point, Jerusalem had not been on the table for this peace plan.
Now, let's be candid. The muscle behind such a decision would have to be the United States of America.
See, absolutely, Sid. The former President Clinton is the, I think you used the word muscle. Is that the word you used?
Yes.
Absolutely. He is there pressuring Israel to give up at least a third of Jerusalem, where the Temple Mount is. I mean, the Israelis would never do that on their own.
Okay, so it hits its all-time high on March 10th, and Barack makes this statement after being muscled by then President Clinton. And what happened? And
since that time, the stock market has, it's at least 50%. We've gone into a free fall. Trillions of dollars have been lost, Sid. I guess, each 1,000 points is, about $1 trillion.
Okay, so that's the NASDAQ. What about the Dow? More people are familiar with the Dow. The Dow hit its all-time high on March 14th, 2000. What happened?
January 14th.
January 14th.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it right now, the newspaper articles in front of me. The Dow reached 11,722, and on that same day, the Supreme Court justices ruled to vote on the partial birth abortion method. So you can see in the newspapers, in fact, I'll read it from the New York Times. The headline is, "Justices to Rule on Law That Bans Abortion Method." And also on that same day, they picked up the gay scout leader with the Boy Scouts. Though on that day, both the Supreme Court was going to rule on both, and we know that they voted 5-4 in favor of the Boy Scouts. But what's interesting about that, Sid, is the sentiment that's come out in certain sections of the United States attacking the Boy Scouts for their stand against homosexuality. And the Supreme Court then did come out and voted to overturn the ban on partial birth abortion, and that decision began on January 14th, 2000. And since that time, that was the all-time high for the stock market. And since that time, it's lost over 1,000 points, maybe even more.
Well, you document in your book certain decisions that former President Bush, former President Clinton made, which have been ungodly positions, such as with Israel, and the consequence that has occurred. What about our current President Bush? What is your sense from the Lord there, in reference to how he'll be with Israel?
He's made some. One good statement was that he would move the capital, or he'd move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, because as you know, virtually none of the countries in the world recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, even though that is Israel's capital. Sid, but I've watched people very close to him that were with his father when he was president, especially James Baker, who were about as hard against Israel as you could get. And I started to get ominous feelings with the current president, and we'll see what time brings.
I mean, talk about an area for focused prayer and fasting. It's got to be, because this country can go one way or the other.
Yes, sir.
And I believe that our current president has been put in office by God for blessing, but it could go either way, so prayer is so vital.
Sid, prayer is vital, and an input by God's people. We can't sit on the sidelines anymore, Sid. We can't. Our nation is at stake. The church is at stake here. God literally can move to end us as a nation, as a world power, definitely, but as a nation. And I don't think the American people, and I'm talking about the church, really grasps this. We're Americans, and we've always been blessed by God, but we don't realize now that we've become the enemy of God.
Let's talk a little bit about abortion and the judgment that occurred when we did something that was pro-abortion.
Sid, we could go back to September of 1989. Do you remember Hurricane Hugo?
Yes.
All right. I was explaining this to a friend of mine before I wrote the book. This would probably be about 1991 and around the 92. And he asked me, what about Hurricane Hugo? And I said, I didn't make a connection. I didn't. At that time, I said, I didn't see a connection. Well, the next day, he came back to me and he said, I had a dream last night. This is what he said, Sid. I had a dream last night, and there is a connection. God showed me there is a connection. And he said, where do you do your research? I said, well, sometimes I go down to the state library if I have to do research. He said, take me there. I want to do this research. So I met him at lunchtime. The guy took off from work. He came there. I showed him how to do the research. And lo and behold, what he found was on the very day that Hurricane Hugo hit the United States, and this is the front page, Washington Post, 2 articles touching each other. The Supreme Court, the then former President George Bush, his administration refused to put a brief in before the Supreme Court for the purpose of overturning Roe versus Wade. And you can see right on the front page of the Washington Post, the top article is Hurricane Hugo bearing down in the United States. It's going to hit on Friday, it says. And of course, at that time, we didn't know where it was going to hit. And the article right below it is the Bush administration has till Friday, that's what it says, to put in the brief to overturn Roe versus Wade. The Bush administration did not put it in, and Hurricane Hugo hit on that very day. It was one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to hit the United States. And it's front page, Washington Post, both articles touching each other, one about the hurricane coming and one about the decision to put in the brief to overturn Roe versus Wade, which was not done. And
you point out in your book that every hurricane that has hit the United States since 1989 has been directly tied to either abortion or homosexuality. Give me one more specific example.
Well, Sid, and I have to add to that, it's abortion, homosexuality, and Arafat coming.
And anti-Semitism or anti-Israel, okay?
Right.
Give me one specific example.
Hurricane Opal, if you remember that smashed into Florida. The hurricane started very unusual. It started in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, very few hurricanes start there, but this one started in the Gulf of Mexico. It was, I'm going to use the word meandering westward, very slowly, parallel to the United States, but towards Mexico, like over the Yucatan Peninsula. Can you picture that in your mind, Sid?
Only as you say it.
Okay. It's not, the hurricane is not coming towards the United States. It's going parallel with the southern part of the United States towards Mexico in the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay. All right.
There's a Supreme Court decision against pro-lifers, and it has to do about the FACE law, which it's short for preventing pro-lifers from picketing and that in front of abortion centers. The Supreme Court refused to hear it, and thus at that point it was a great victory for the pro-abortion forces.
Yes, that I remember.
Okay, at that very time, Sid, the hurricane virtually made a 90-degree turn. On that day, when the Supreme Court made that decision, it made a 90-degree turn. Its winds became extremely strong. It accelerated in speed and headed right for Pensacola, Florida. And it turned. The hurricane actually did almost, I won't say a U-turn, but it did a 90-degree turn when the Supreme Court made that decision. It was like it was a whistle. It's like God whistled and said, "Come here. We have to have judgment on America."
You can't get any more specific than that, but Mishpucha, his whole book is filled with specifics of sin and judgment the same day. I really urge you to get a copy of this book. It'll put a very healthy fear of God in you and people you care a lot about. The book's title, God's Final Warning to America, $14, postage paid. This Shabbat broadcast. I want to bless you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord cause his countenance to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord grant you his shalom, his completeness in your spirit, soul, and body. In the name of the Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace, Yeshua HaMashiach Tzidkenu, Jesus the Messiah, our righteousness.
Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmarecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chumnecha. Yisa Adonai
If you would like to receive a complimentary copy of our bi-monthly teaching newsletter, cassette catalog, or information about becoming Mishpocha, write to me, Sid Roth, Post Office Box 1918, Brunswick, Georgia, 31521. Or call our order-only line, 1-800-548-1918. To place a credit card order, call anytime, 1-800-548-1918. For all other calls, the number is 912-265-2500. That's 912-265-2500. For a cassette tape of this week's broadcast, send $5 to Sid Roth, Post Office Box 1918, Brunswick, Georgia, 31521. Look us up on the web, www.sidroth.org. That's www.sidroth.org.